The Chinese Communist Party gains more influence over Europe, but a new effort in the UK is seeking to change that. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Europe's financial elite are in bed with the Chinese Communist Party. The EU abandoned human rights to get a China investment deal. But some in the British government are trying to make sure the UK doesn't make the same mistake. For more, I spoke with Benedict Rogers, the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch and deputy chair of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. Benedict, as always, it's a pleasure having you on.
Thank you. It's always a great pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. Well, it seems like every time we talk, there's been another horrible thing that's happened in Hong Kong. Last week, the Hong Kong government arrested more than 50 pro-democracy activists. What do you think of the international response to that?
I think the international response has not been anything like what it should be in proportion to the significance of these arrests. I mean, this was essentially the final dismantling of what existed as a democracy movement. That's not to say the democracy movement won't try to carry on, but in formal terms, this was a major. It was the biggest mass arrest in one swoop that I think there's ever been in recent years, and the international community's response was some strong words, but very little else, and even those strong words were rather lost in the midst of everything else going on. So I definitely want to see more action.
Well, it definitely seems like the Communist Party chose to make those arrests on a very particular day, January 6th, almost as if they knew the rest of the world would be distracted by something else.
Well, absolutely. January the 6th was a pretty dark day, I think, for democracy in terms of the arrest of people in Hong Kong in the morning, Hong Kong time, for the simple crime in inverted commas of trying to carry out an election. And of course, it ended with the very ugly scenes in Washington, D.C., a beacon of democracy around the world as well. So whilst I wouldn't compare the two, and I think America's democracy is strong and Hong Kong's freedoms are being dismantled, so it would be wrong to compare them. But nevertheless, they both happened on the same day, and that was very, very alarming.
You worked on the UK Conservative Party Human Rights Commission report on China, which is called The Darkness Deepens. Very cheerful, by the way. The report calls out the mendacity, brutality, inhumanity, insecurity, and criminality of the Chinese Communist Party. You don't miss words there, do you?
We don't, but it's a report that is based on hours and hours of testimonial evidence that was presented to the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission in hearings throughout much of last year, and pages of written evidence. And that evidence was submitted by a wide range of sources, all essentially saying the same thing and painting a picture of. I think what's significant about this report is that there are other reports that highlight particular issues, the Uyghurs, the situation in Hong Kong, Tibet, and so on. There's very few reports that I've come across that put the whole picture together and show that the CCP is not only committing very likely genocide against the Uyghurs and dismantling democracy in Hong Kong. It is across the board. It is Christians, it's Falun Gong practitioners, it's civil society activists, lawyers, bloggers, etc. It's an 88-page report with a long list of tragedies, and it follows, of course, the report that the Commission published in 2016, which was titled "The Darkest Moment." And the reason for that title at that time was that one of the people who gave evidence then said that the situation in 2016 was the darkest moment since the Tiananmen massacre. With hindsight, that title was perhaps a bit premature, and hence the darkness deepens.
I don't know if that's funny or tragic.
Yeah. Well, it's very tragic in reality, but you have to keep a sense of humor in very dark times, and we found ourselves as a commission faced with that linguistic challenge. What title do we give this if we titled it The Darkest Moment 4 years ago?
Well, so then what's the next one going to be called if it gets worse?
I think we'll have to come to that when we get to it. But any suggestions, let me know.
Just a stream of swears. Well, okay, so hopefully it won't get to that point. So what actions does the report suggest the UK take against the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses?
Well, it calls, first of all, for a comprehensive and coordinated, thorough review of UK-China policy across government departments. So not just the Foreign Office, but across relevant government departments, and for a total reset and recalibration of that relationship. It calls for targeted sanctions, which have not yet been applied. It urges Britain to work with our allies to lead the establishment of a coalition of the free world to act as much as possible together. That shouldn't mean the lowest common denominator. I mean, countries should be as robust as they possibly can be. But I think there is a need for the democratic world to unite and coordinate much more than they have been, because essentially we need to form a united front to counter the CCP's united front.
I like the sound of that. I know recently some UK members of Parliament have suggested a genocide amendment to the UK trade bill. What is that?
Yes, so that is an amendment that was pioneered in the House of Lords by people like Lord Alton and quite an amazing range of members of the House of Lords, former cabinet ministers, the former head of the Royal Air Force, the former head of our intelligence services, former Supreme Court judges, and a whole range of other really distinguished figures. And it now goes to the House of Commons next week. And what the amendment tries to do is two things. Firstly, to create a mechanism whereby people who believe there is a case of genocide, and this applies not simply in the case of China, but genocide anywhere, wherever it happens, can come to the High Court of England and Wales and ask the High Court to make a preliminary determination as to whether the evidence does suggest genocide or not. And the consequence of that, if the High Court does conclude that it's genocide, under this amendment, the government will be required not to enter into a bilateral trade deal with the states that are found to be committing genocide. So if a trade deal is already in place, that should be revoked, and if it isn't in place, steps towards one should be stopped. So that's the effect of it, and it was designed to answer a very simple problem, which is that for decades now, the British government's position. This isn't always the position of other governments, but the British government's position has always been, it's not for governments to determine whether something is genocide, it's for the courts. But the problem in that's a perfectly logical, theoretical position to have. But the problem with it is the international court mechanisms, are very unsatisfactory. And particularly in the case of China, you're never going to get a referral. So this is an amendment designed to get out of that vicious circle.
Well, you certainly phrased that in a very polite way. But so it sounds pretty straightforward. Don't trade with countries that commit genocide. But it seems like the UK government is not happy about it. So if the genocide amendment passes, would the UK government actually apply that to China?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, if it passes and becomes law, and if then a case is brought to the High Court of England and Wales in regard to the Uyghurs, for example, and if the High Court concludes that what's happening to the Uyghurs is genocide, then under the law, the UK would not be able to negotiate a trade deal with China in those circumstances. Now, realistically, there's going to be quite a long time frame to complete all those steps. But nevertheless, it's a very important. If it passes, it would send a very important message, and it would be law that people can go to the court, see if the court decides it's genocide, and if it does, the government must abide by the requirements of that amendment.
Well, so speaking of trade, the EU has recently announced a major investment deal with China. How would this deal affect human rights in China?
The EU's deal is one of the most appalling deals that I've seen. And what was so striking about it was the timing of it. Firstly, it came just a few days after the European Parliament itself, one of the EU's main institutions, had passed a resolution calling for targeted sanctions, calling for access to the camps in Xinjiang, and very importantly, calling for any investment deal to have particular standards around labor rights. And just a few days later, the European Commission and the member states completely ignored the European Parliament and went ahead with this deal that has no safeguards on human rights. It has maybe a few sort of vague promises by the CCP to move towards signing various international agreements, but we all know what to think of the CCP's word. We can't ever take their word for anything other than essentially an untruth. And so it's a deal, and coming just a short time before the transition in the United States as well. It sends a pretty bad signal to the new administration in the US. So I think it was. I think most people agree it's a bad deal in itself, and it was very bad timing. And I hope that the European Parliament and other member states will reconsider it before it's too late.
Is it too late to do something about the EU-China investment deal?
Well, it has been signed. So in that sense, it probably is too late. But I think there are steps that the EU could take. I mean, I said when the 53 were arrested in Hong Kong that in response to that, the EU should immediately revoke and reconsider the deal. Unfortunately, they didn't listen to me. But I think we need to keep up the pressure on the EU itself and on member states to take action going forward. If they can't revoke the deal, then at least they need to balance it with other measures, including the application of targeted Magnitsky sanctions.
You're part of two upcoming events about human rights in China that people can join online. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, so the first later today on the 13th of January is the launch of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission's report, The Darkness Deepens. And that's an online event. I've tweeted about it. There's an Eventbrite invitation out there. People can register. And at that event, we will have some very amazing speakers. Ian Duncan Smith, who is the former leader of the British Conservative Party, but also the co-chair of IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, will be speaking at it. So will Nathan Law, the highest profile exiled Hong Kong activist. Rahima Mahmood, who's a very high-profile Uyghur campaigner. Simon Cheng, who you may recall was a British consulate employee in Hong Kong who ended up in jail in China and suffering some horrific torture there. And Dr. Teng Biao, a prominent mainland Chinese exiled lawyer and activist. And I'll say a few words as well. So that's the lineup at that event. And then tomorrow, Thursday, the 14th of January, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute think tank in Canada, together with Hong Kong Watch, IPAC, and a number of others, has a big online conference on human rights in China as a whole, and with a number of politicians and prominent activists speaking at that and looking at what are the ways forward to addressing human rights in China.
Well, I'll definitely put links to those events below, and I hope everyone watching definitely checks that out. Benedict, it's always great to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for watching. I put the links to those events in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.